It started with a few missing packages. Nothing major, just little things I ordered online. But then, one by one, every delivery I was waiting for started to vanish. At first, I blamed the courier, until one afternoon, I checked my camera footage and saw her. My next-door neighbor, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcer, walking right up to my porch, smiling and stealing my boxes like she owned them. She thought she was untouchable, hiding behind HOA rules and fake complaints. But what she didn't know was that I had a plan, one she'd never wash off. Would you have stayed quiet or made her pay?
When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd finally made it. A quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with perfect lawns, fresh paint, and a lake view I could see from my porch. The kind of place that made you feel safe, like all your hard work had finally paid off. The neighbors waved when I drove by, the mail always arrived on time, and the HOA sent out cheerful monthly newsletters about community barbecues and holiday decor contests. It felt peaceful, at least for a while. There was one person, though, who stood out immediately. Karen. She lived 3 houses down, right on the corner, and she introduced herself before I'd even finished unloading my boxes, not with a friendly smile, but with a clipboard in hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her tone flat. "Just so you know, trash bins go out after 6 p.m., and the HOA has rules about porch furniture. You'll want to read the manual." I laughed it off, assuming she was just the overly organized type. Every community had one. I didn't realize I just met my personal storm cloud, the woman who turned my little piece of paradise into a daily game of control and confrontation. The first few weeks were fine. I worked from home, took evening walks by the lake, and spent weekends fixing up the porch. I even planted a few flowers, not realizing that, apparently, unapproved floral colors were a thing here. Because sure enough, within days, I got my first HOA note. Please remove or replace non-regulation flora. It was signed by Karen herself. I started seeing her everywhere, pacing the sidewalks with her phone out, snapping pictures of neighbors' lawns, pointing out violations like she was earning badges for each one. She wasn't just a member of the HOA, she was the HOA, or at least that's what she wanted everyone to think. But things really changed when I started getting more deliveries. See, I run a small online business from home. I get shipments of supplies, nothing flashy, just packages from Amazon or small vendors. I usually work late, so I'd see the delivery alerts pop up on my phone. Except lately, those alerts didn't match what I found when I checked the porch. The first time, I thought it was my mistake. Maybe it had been left at the wrong address. But the second time and then the third, I started to suspect something else. One day, I caught sight of Karen from my upstairs window. She was walking down the street, same clipboard in hand, when a delivery truck stopped at my house. The driver dropped off a brown box, gave a quick knock, and drove off. Karen stopped, looked around, then casually walked right up my driveway and picked it up. I blinked, thinking maybe she was just moving it to the side, trying to protect it from view. But no, she walked off, my box tucked under her arm, and disappeared into her garage. I stood frozen at the window, my mind racing. Did that really just happen? I ran downstairs and checked the porch. Gone. Completely gone. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just nosy. She was stealing from me. The woman who bragged about enforcing every HOA rule was the same one walking off with my property. I wanted to confront her right then, but something told me to wait, to be smart. Because knowing Karen, if I accused her without proof, she'd twist it around, say I was violating HOA guidelines for harassment or creating a hostile environment. That's exactly how people like her operated, hiding behind rules they bent for everyone else. So, I played it cool. I smiled when I saw her on the street. I even waved when she pretended not to see me. But behind the scenes, I started preparing. I ordered a new security camera, one that blended into my doorframe, nearly invisible. It arrived 2 days later, and that's when I started recording. The next delivery came that Friday, a small package I'd been waiting for. I set the box on my porch deliberately after work and left my car parked out front so she'd think I wasn't home. Sure enough, around sunset, I saw her again. Same walk, same clipboard, same glance over her shoulder. This time, I watched from my phone, live feed rolling, as she marched right up, grabbed my package, and smirked before walking off. There it was. Proof. She'd stolen from me not once, not twice, but repeatedly. I couldn't believe it. The so-called guardian of the HOA was nothing more than a thief hiding behind her title. Still, I didn't call the police, not yet, because catching someone like Karen red-handed wasn't enough. People like her needed a lesson, one that would leave a mark she'd never forget. And that's when the idea started forming. A little plan. Petty, yes, but perfectly fair. If she loved taking my packages so much, then maybe it was time to give her one she'd regret opening.
I told myself I'd keep this clean. No theatrics, no public shaming, just a tidy slice of justice served where it would sting the most. Her pride. First, I tightened the evidence chain. I labeled every incoming box with the exact delivery time and tracking number. I saved every clip, time-stamped and duplicated the footage, backed it up to a cloud drive and to a spare hard disk hidden in my garage. I make folders with neat names, Package 01, Package 02, each one a tiny indictment. George from across the street, retired cop, bad knee, good instincts, agreed to be my witness. He laughed at first when I described the idea, but after he watched the footage, the laugh dried into a grim nod. People like this, he said, they only stop when it costs them something they can't fake. Then came the engineering part. I'd never intended to become a DIY specialist, but the internet is a remarkable place for inventive mischief. I researched non-lethal deterrents, glitter traps, stink devices, glitter glue, things that embarrass without real harm. I rejected anything that could genuinely injure. This was theater and consequence, not crime. I tested small, because when you build a trap, you have to make sure the trap lands on the target, not on you. My first attempt exploded purple dye all over my garage. My hands turned an embarrassed violet for a week, and my daughter ribbed me mercilessly. I learned to make cleaner casings, softer dispersal, delayed triggers. The right mixture would stain skin and fabric, but wash off over a stubborn week or two, leaving a mark long enough for the world to see and remember. Word spread. Subtle. Controlled. I didn't post anything online. I told George and a few trusted neighbors, enough that someone would notice if anything went sideways. We planned for evidence, a tiny micro camera hidden in the decoy box to catch the moment the lid popped, and another aimed from my porch that would show the thief approaching. Redundancy was important. If there was one thing Karen excelled at, it was spinning stories. I wanted a silent record she couldn't rewrite. In the background, Karen continued to perform. Her HOA emails arrived like clockwork. Reminder, porch aesthetics. Reminder, mailbox finish. All signed in that looping script that smoothed guilt into authority. She'd file petty violations with surgical precision. My trash bin 3 inches too far from the curb, my porch plant in a non-approved pot. The whole board seemed to orbit her gravity. When I asked a few neighbors why nobody confronted her, they answered the same way. Fear of retaliation. Fines, approvals revoked, private inspections. She could be a small bureaucracy's version of a bully. I didn't want to escalate the HOA war, just reclaim my things and patience. But the harassment continued. One letter arrived accusing me of creating an antagonistic environment. Another fined me $50 for improper screening visibility. The irony of being fined for wanting to record what was being stolen from me wasn't lost on me. Each notice felt like a gauntlet thrown down, and each time I folded the envelope into a folder labeled Evidence. Preparation day was quiet and oddly ceremonial. I bought a decoy box online, big enough to look tempting but not suspicious. Luxury bath set, printed in tasteful font. Inside, the dye capsule sat inside a false bottom, the trigger wired to a small pressure plate. Open the lid, the mechanism would activate after a 3-second delay. The micro camera was taped under the flap, its lens peeking through a vent I'd carved and masked with glue. I placed the box on my porch, exactly where packages usually sat, and stepped back inside, heart thudding. I rehearsed the narrative in my head a dozen times. This wasn't about cruelty. This was a lesson in consequence for someone who used fear and paperwork to take what didn't belong to her. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was cruel and precise. The day I chose fell on a humid Thursday. Karen's pattern was relentless. She favored late mornings. That week, the HOA newsletter posted about a community safety patrol scheduled for Wednesday and a block cleanup Saturday. Those posts were gold. They revealed her calendar, and more importantly, her confidence. She believed she owned that schedule. She believed she owned us. I set everything and left the porch light dimmed, the camera feed live on my phone, and George sat 2 houses down with his coffee and his phone pointed at his window. He was an old-school backup. If anything happened, he'd step outside and make noise or call the police. I would rather have him there than not. At 10:42 a.m., the white SUV glided down the street. There was no flourish, just the same self-satisfied stride, the same clipboard clutched like a talisman. The camera captured her checking the street like a queen, ensuring no peasants watched too closely. She didn't glance at my house. She didn't have to. Her confidence was a map. She bent, folded, scooped. My box disappeared under her arm. She moved with practiced ease, an economy of theft. She placed the parcel into her front seat, tapped it once as if marking a job completed, and walked back to her house. She didn't hurry. She never did. That was her advantage. Slow, methodical entitlement. From behind the panes, I watched the live feed and felt a cold squeeze in my chest, equal parts triumph and dread. The micro camera recorded the motion of the lid, the pop, the first plume of color. I could hear my own breath. 20 minutes. 30. My phone stayed stubbornly silent. I started to worry that a miscalculation had ruined everything. Then George's text came in. "Dude, check your doorbell cam." My thumb hovered. I opened the second angle and watched the playback. The box in her hands, the climb up her porch steps, the slow pivot as she turned the lid. Then the frame went wild with color on my microfeed. A sudden bloom, ridiculous and brilliant, fanning out like a bad watercolor. Purple splashed the inside of the box, yellow streaks annotated the edges. For a beat, I couldn't tell which camera I was watching. The porch mic picked up a startled shriek. My phone buzzed again. "George, she's outside! She's purple!" My mouth filled with a laugh that felt dangerous. This is it, I thought. The moment where patience met payoff. I stood up on trembling legs, walked to the window, and saw her in her driveway, hands flailing, her pink blazer, a new, offensive tie-dye. Neighbors had noticed. A few were peering from behind curtains. Someone was filming from across the street. The quiet little world of Willow Creek suddenly held 1,000 small witnesses. The power she used to wield, her sigh, her signature on a fine, hung, suddenly fragile, like a mask at the edge of being ripped away. But every satisfying plan has a pivot point, and we weren't at the end yet. I had evidence, I had witnesses, I had chaos unfolding on her lawn. I also had to prepare for retaliation. People who lose their crowns tend to swing wild. Lawsuits, counter-accusations, threats, those were as predictable as sunrise. George's face on the live feed had gone from giddy to wary. He messaged, "Pack your docs, now." I backed up the footage again, triple redundancy, and printed stills. The folder that had been only evidence for months suddenly felt heavier. I knew what would come next: outrage, denials, legal posturing. I also knew that the neighborhood was awake now in a way that it hadn't been for years. I turned the camera back to the feed and watched Karen, storm into her house, leaving a trail of purple fingerprints across her doorframe. The screen blurred as I blinked, and the adrenaline taste in my mouth was sweet and metallic. Then my phone buzzed again. This message was different. An officer's badge number. George had already called the precinct. The text read, "They're on their way. Be ready to show everything. Don't do anything stupid." I stood at the window, folder in hand, and felt the whole story tightening like a wire. The trap had worked, the payoff had landed, but the real test, the moment where the small theatrical victory met the cold eye of consequence, was only just beginning.
The cruiser's lights were a distant hum that felt too small for the chaos in my chest. When the officer stepped onto the street, the neighborhood held its breath like a single audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Karen, purple-streaked, indignant, clutching at her clipboard like a talisman, opened her front door and launched into a practice performance. Shock, then outrage, then that patented, "How dare you accuse me?" indignation she always leaned on when paperwork wasn't enough. But I didn't give her the stage. I walked outside with my evidence folder under my arm, George at my side, and the phone in my hand showing the time-stamped clips. The officer took them in, played the footage on his tablet, and watched Karen's slow, methodical theft unfold in ugly, undeniable pixels. The micro-camera's angle showed her hands as they went into the box. The porch cam showed her carrying it away. The decoy box's internal cam caught the exact moment the die burst and painted her palms like a billboard. Karen stammered through excuses. I thought it was abandoned. I was protecting the neighborhood. But the footage spoke a clearer, louder truth. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak before hovered in driveways and windows, their faces a mix of vindication and relief. One by one, they began to recount petty grievances Karen had imposed, mysterious fines, harassment emails, the way she'd weaponized minor infractions. The officer wrote it all down. Things didn't explode theatrically. There was no show trial on the lawn, but the momentum shifted. The officer took statements, logged the digital evidence, and made the formal report. George photographed Karen's stained hands for the record, and I printed stills into an evidentiary packet labeled with dates and tracking numbers. Karen, stripped of her confident pretense, retreated into her house and shut the door on a neighborhood that suddenly saw her in a new light. The next weeks were quiet, but consequential. The police report existed now. The precinct filed it as theft with supporting digital evidence. The HOA board, which up until then had been a rubber stamp for Karen's whims, called an emergency meeting after enough neighbors demanded action. They couldn't erase the footage. They couldn't unsign the printed statements. Under pressure and the bright, uncomfortable public attention, two things happened fast. One, the board voted to suspend Karen's enforcement privileges pending a formal review. They instituted a temporary code of conduct for board members, no unilateral fines, mandatory disclosure of complaints, and a review committee that included at least one non-board resident. Two, Karen was asked to attend a mediation session. The board recommended restitution for the stolen items and professional counseling if she wanted to continue in any HOA role. Whether she took the help was her business. What mattered was that her unilateral power was checked. On the personal level, some damage was permanent. Reputation is hard to rebuild. but the stain on her hands faded in real time, while the memory of her behavior didn't. A couple of neighbors who'd been silent for years came forward publicly with their own stories. The community started to talk again instead of whispering. We organized a volunteer HOA oversight committee, one that required rotating elected membership and transparency. George, ever the retired cop, helped draft a simple Neighbors' Bill of Rights to protect residents from petty retaliation. For me, the payoff wasn't vindictive glee so much as a sober reclaiming of normal life. My packages arrived again without incident. I kept better cameras and a clearer paper trail. More importantly, the neighborhood stopped assuming the worst about speaking up. People who'd felt powerless realized that a community, when it actually acts like one, has teeth, and that bullies thrive in silence. If you enjoyed seeing Justice Served, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next HOA nightmare might just be wilder than this one. Don't miss it.